Oh, shalom, my friends, shalom, my enemies. This is your old pal, Rabbi Sol Solomon, founder and spiritual leader of Temple Sons of Bitches in Great Neck, New York. And I'm so delighted to be able to bring to you a new friend of the neighborhood. Ladies and gentlemen, a sports person. Let's get that sound effect going. Ladies and gentlemen, oh, listen to the crowd go wild. How do I stop it? I can't stop it. Hold on. Where the hell is it? All right, shut up. There we go. The crowd goes wild, ladies and gentlemen. Personally, I prefer Girls Gone Wild, but this will do. We are playing that crowd sound effect, as actually professional sports is playing that crowd sound effect now. Oh, you look at this. The man is such a sports nut that he's watching college football behind me. Can you turn that shit off so I can actually talk to you and not be distracted by a bunch of people running around? Thank you. Thank you. We're just doing a little video show here. Don't mind us. But the person who just turned off that screen is TROY Coverdale. Now, TROY is a man who has spent the last 18 years calling the plays for both the football games and the basketball games from the University of Northern Colorado, the Bears, on KFKA radio. And we want to celebrate that this week, not because 18 is high, it's a wonderful number for Jewish people, but because TROY got shit-canned this week by the station because of COVID. So first of all, condolences to you, TROY. I'm sure you're going to bounce back, but how are you? How you doing?
You know, it's been a crazy couple of months, I will put it that way. And really, when you go all the way back to the tail end of March, when come off of a Big Sky Conference tournament that didn't take place and find myself in quarantine, if you will, and never got to go back into my own office other than to clean it out to finish up the stint. But, you know, I keep reminding myself, and my wife keeps reminding herself, we're in this for a reason. Things are going on for reasons that we don't know yet, and we'll do our best, and we're going to try and look to the best of it, that it gives us an opportunity to maybe get back closer to family.
Wow, that is such a goyish thing to say. I can't believe it. But here's a question for you. So what I don't understand is that all right, there's no games going on. I get this. There's nothing to call. And then I think rightfully, we might disagree on this, that they canceled at least the fall seasons for the university. Fine. Mm-hmm. But you're both the sports director and the news director for this radio station. So what, they don't need a news person? Why the hell weren't you fulfilling other roles besides calling football games? What's the deal?
Unfortunately, what they've run into is a budget issue, and it strictly comes down to the fact that there was an overemphasis placed on sporting events, and specifically on high school sports in terms of the station. Well, high school sports haven't taken place since that same weekend in March that I came back from the Big Sky tournament. You've seen here in Colorado where softball is being played, golf is being played cross country, but as of right now, and this could change in a few days again because CHSAA and Governor Polis are talking again about trying to get football up and running. But you take away football specifically, but you had no baseball season for the preps. The American Legion baseball season was severely limited because of COVID. And now no football season, and the station is unfortunately is having a tight time financially because of that. And unfortunately, I made for an easy target.
Station gets paid by the schools to run these things, and that's why they're not getting the money they have? Or?
No, the advertising. It's just out and out the advertising. Without the games to broadcast, you don't have the advertisements to be played either.
But
You
they're
don't
running
have
all this syndicated right-wing stuff from the Fox News kinds of people. Aren't they getting a ton from that? Or people don't really.
Well, and let me correct that, because the station over the past few years has shifted to more of, during the day especially, a sports feel. Dan Patrick, Colin Cowherd, middays are a local sports talk show. Now, so I will state that up front. But radio as a whole right now, especially when you want to talk about AM and talk radio, uh, are really hurting from this virus and the things that it has brought on through the course of it. This week, Entercom, as an example, major corporate entity, cut a number of positions nationwide on its alternative and country stations because it has such a debt load that they're having to try and pay off with what have become declining ad revenues. And so it's easier for them to bring in someone to do a national midday show, for example, on a country station or a group of country stations, than it is to have individual shows on all of those country stations nationwide. And that's unfortunately one of the realities in our business right now, is that advertising dollars are on the decline. The longer that this continues, that this economy continues the way it is, the more difficult it is for stations to continue operating. In KFKA's case, they're owned by a family. They are a single entity. The AM is the only station that this family owns. There is no FM to it, though they are working on trying to get a FM translator in place. But you're also limited by time frame because of the FCC. You have to have it running within 18 months of getting that license, and that costs money. And so, unfortunately, like I said, I wound up being an easy target because of what I was being paid, even though, by all rights, it wasn't all that much.
It's radio money. You're not,
Yeah.
It's not buying you a yacht.
Correct.
But let's skip happier times, shall we say, to
Sure.
your getting started in broadcasting. Was it something that you knew right from like grade school or high school, and you knew, you had the voice, you had the presence? It's like, yep, I belong doing this, or did you more like stumble into it?
I had an urge to do it by the time that I was a junior in high school. I had started to plan towards that, and in fact was reminded by one of my high school teachers this week that I had boldly proclaimed that I wanted to be the voice of the Kansas State Wildcats. And I went on to school at Kansas State and got my degree in broadcast journalism. So I had the intent coming out of school, and got involved very quickly once I got to college, involved in student radio and involved in calling games, as at the time the student station at K-State was the voice for the local high school on top of what it was doing. With a K-State schedule, though, there were some legal things that they had to deal with to not interfere with what the rights contract was for the commercial network that was running. But it allowed me a great opportunity to find out the things that I wanted to do in radio. And I've had the bug for a long time. And, when this right now would have been the start for year 31 in the broadcast business, and dating back to my 18th birthday, which was my first day on air and my first day of classes at Kansas State. Wow. So it has been quite a run. And
well, it's not over yet. I mean, you might take a break from that, but are you getting LinkedIn messages from people? Are you getting leads? Or are you just going to sit this out until the COVID thing for a couple of months, and then offers and possibilities will happen? Or are you just moving to Kansas?
And networking is in place, and there are some things that are potentially in the works that aren't necessarily broadcast immediately, but are things that can help set me up for being in the right spot when situations take place. Luckily, again, I've been at this for so long that my network is built pretty good, and I'm blessed in that area.
Yeah,
and
but the thing is
that
that
I can.
you, unlike a lot of people in your position, you have stability. Because most people who really get into the radio business, they're 1 year at this station and they have to pack up and move, and then
Right.
5 years here, and then 3 years there, and then when they're lucky, they get into a major market on a 50,000 watt. You stable. You got to Colorado. Yeah, you sat down. You made the deal with KFKA, and boom, 18 years. That's a career in itself, quite honestly. So it's great that you've been able to network outside the spine of
Right.
Northern Colorado, I got to tell you.
One of the things that's funny about that is that the stations that I worked for when I first came out of college, I worked for 6 years there and thought, boy, that's a pretty good stint. That's a pretty lengthy stint in the world of radio before I moved on. Little did I know that it would be an 18-year stint here that I would wind up in. And I will be perfectly honest. It's not that I haven't looked at other opportunities. They just haven't presented themselves right over time. And, that's the nature of the beast. I sure as heck wasn't giving up a Division I gig, and because there's only 300 some odd of those in the country. But now, well, we'll see what comes next.
Well, let me ask, we want to remind people that Troy Coverdale was calling games, basketball and football, for the University of Northern Colorado Bears. So all their teams are called the Bears. Doesn't matter what sport they play. They have a chess team, it's the Cubs, but everybody else is the Bears. But let me ask you, do you remember the first game you called for UNC, for KFKA?
Oh, boy. I don't recall the first game immediately off the top of my head. It was such a whirlwind of a time because I moved to Greeley in November of 2002, right after Thanksgiving. We went the month of December without covering UNC at that point, just so I could get up to speed on everything. And so it was January when we picked up doing UNC basketball, really right at the start of the North Central Conference season, as that was the last year that men's and women's basketball was playing at the Division II level. So I remember more of a couple of the road trips that I do, even of what that first game was out of the box, because it was such a quick turnaround in terms of getting up to speed and getting on the road. I always tease one friend who's a sports information person that works for the Ohio Valley Conference. He was the assistant SID at UNC when I took the job and had just gotten into that role himself. We go to find ourselves in Fargo and Brookings to close out the regular season basketball-wise, and had to deal with just downright cold, snowy conditions.
In Fargo, North Dakota? I would never guess.
Yeah.
Fargo in January. Lovely.
But what made it even funnier is, well, Kyle is a guy from Kentucky, had not seen that much snow in his life, and had to have an added few days on the road then to go to Grand Forks because the women's basketball team had to play a first-round tournament game in Grand Forks against the University of North Dakota. And I swear to God, he was cursing that entire trip for the rest of his tenure at UNC.
At some point, everybody starts cursing UNC for one reason or another. He just started early. Let me tell you. But what are one or two of the most memorable games that you covered for the university?
Well,
or for the radio station covering the university. Yeah.
There are a lot of performances that will always stand out, but game-wise, you have to put the victory over Montana in the Big Sky Conference tournament in 2011 as the biggest, because that gave the school its first ever NCAA tournament berth, and the Bears would go the next week and play San Diego State, and Kawhi Leonard, who helped power them into the Sweet 16 that year. UNC made it an interesting game. They never really truly got blown out in that contest, but the conference tournament championship was a lot of fun because it was in Greeley. It was on our home floor, and it was the culmination really of a 4-year stretch where Tad Boyle had laid the groundwork as head coach, and BJ Hill had been his top assistant. BJ was head coach then for that first year, the year that they make the tournament. And
when you go through
Actually, like most, I will say that like most men, Jack Hill was lucky to have a BJ with him. But you know,
yeah,
please continue. Yes.
the key point of that is that they went from a team that won only 4 games in Coach Boyle's first season to one that made the NCAA tournament in just 4 years. And that's the type of turnaround that you want to see, that you love to talk about. And those guys were still in the system. Those guys were the guys that had been the ones that suffered through the 4-win season.
Well, here that's what brings me to my next question, because we are talking about the University of Northern Colorado, and for the past decade, I mean, you know, it's a kind of school where the students in the stands will be jumping up and down. We're not blowing out. We're not blowing out. I mean, especially the football team has just sucked dirt for year after year. They tried one coach, they tried another coach for a bunch of years. And so as a sportscaster, how nice do you have to be? Because the bills are sort of paid by the university. So you have to kind of make nice, but at the same time, how honest can you be on the air when you're looking at something that should be flushed?
You can be honest enough to note where weaknesses are and where, okay, we don't have the personnel to keep up with in a situation, or honest enough that, you know, on an individual play, you can just point out, okay, this didn't work because. You can be that nice. You have to remember that you're also talking to not just fans, but you're also talking to families. Yes. And the first priority is to remember that these are student athletes. They are kids. They are not adults. And it's not their fault that they aren't put in the greatest situations. We'll leave it at that.
No, that's fair. You don't want to tell
by whether it's administration, whether it's coaching, whether it's those things, the student athletes aren't always to fault. And in many ways, it's more on the outside influences than it is on the student athletes themselves.
Right. I mean, they choose to play, and they choose to take the scholarships that come with it. So on some level, it's on them a little bit too. But if they're not in the right school for them, if they should be playing peewee football, you know, against high schoolers and not up against, I don't know, I forget the teams that are in the Big Sky, whatever the hell it's called. But you can't, sure, you don't tell a parent, you know, for your son, for a football player, he'd make a great backgammon player. I mean, it's just like, no, you got to be sort of nice. Yeah.
You also have to remember that such is recruiting, and that's where it falls on the coaches as well, in how they analyze players and how they look at players and how they want to piece together a program, or even the type of player that they're looking for to fit a scheme. That's one of the things that you know, we talk about in sports. We talk an awful lot about how teams at the professional level are built by the draft. Well, recruiting is that for college football, college basketball. And if you're not doing the right things in recruiting and you aren't able to get the caliber of player that you need, and it is a complete crapshoot, let's be perfectly honest, because things change, and you're talking about kids that are 18 to 22 years old in most cases. Lives change dramatically during that time frame, and bodies change dramatically during that time frame, and so it really can be a crapshoot. And if you have, even in the case of say you wind up where maybe you guess on 5 players, well, at the level that UNC is playing at, the FCS level for football, you only have 63 scholarships. 5 players in a class makes a difference. It really does. And if you whiff on those 5 players, you know, you can very easily have your recruiting class come up well short, and that sticks with your program.
Well, here's the other thing, though, that even though a couple of years ago UNC had what seemed to be really minor violations in terms of recruitment and things like that, how is a school supposed to get by when other schools are just throwing whores and cars and, you know, a year's supply of kosher food at these athletes and saying, oh, yeah, come to our school. And it's all under the table and wink, wink. Uh-oh. Hello? Shalom. Shalom. Oh, Troy. Troy, we seem to have
Rabbi Chatham.
I'm going to chat him here because.
Then what?
Oh, hello. You froze
Hi
there for a minute. You're back in Fargo, North Dakota. Now have you flown down? Are you warm?
Thank you. Yes. The thing to remember with that caliber of program that you're talking about, the ones that are able to recruit the Zion Williamsons, for example, in basketball, that's because they're at the level that they are. They're in those Power 5 conferences. They're the major programs. UNC is not going to be able to ever recruit that type of a player. One of the things that is going to continue to be something to watch is going to be the name and likeness legislation that is starting to be discussed at the national level. And it's basically it amounts to royalties for student athletes. And how will schools like UNC be able to maintain and pay that type of money for their student athletes versus what another school, say, let's just say CSU as an example even, because it's not a major difference in terms of the school, in terms of the personnel. It's a difference in terms of their conference. It's a difference in terms of some of the funding that comes in at CSU. So even there, how is UNC going to be able to compete with Colorado State when it comes to
Paying.
Promising? Yeah,
right.
Because Colorado State, they've got how many games that do show up on TV? UNC's case, the bulk of their basketball season winds up on streaming TV only, streaming video only. So there's a lot of those things that are going to be very interesting to watch. College athletics coming off of this pandemic is going to be faced with a lot of questions, and there's a ton of uncertainty going into it.
There's a question, I mean, even before the pandemic, the idea of paying student athletes, because, there's some schools, not UNC, make millions on the sports, Friday Night Lights and all of that. I mean, that's just high school, but and the athletes feel, hey, we're playing, and yes, we get scholarships and some food, but, they're making bazillions off of us in our prime years. We want to cut. Do you agree with that? Do you think that should be a thing?
I do. There should be a way to be able to make that system fair, because all you're looking at that money doing for the major programs is just continue an arms race, if you will, in terms of facilities, in terms of the varying things that they are able to then turn around and say, hey, we provide this for this program, while UNC is a great example. They renovated an old football stadium to turn it into a soccer stadium, and that took some doing. And all the credit in the world for being proactive to go about it that way, and they turned it into a nice facility. But it's not going to be what Colorado has for a soccer facility over here in Boulder. And the big part of that is then on top of it, those big athletic departments spending that money, and they'll say it's on the student athletes, they'll say it's because of the student athletes. All of those athletic departments are one key thing: nonprofit. All of their money has to be sewn back into their specific entity, if you will, so that they can maintain that nonprofit status. And so that's why it becomes a facilities race, and it becomes so overwhelmingly split between a school like a UNC versus a school like a North Carolina.
Wow. Well, or you just make all the athletes shareholders or something, or put them on
Right.
the directors. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot that could be done there. And like I said, the interesting thing about not just even the pandemic, but even what we've seen this summer with the protests and Black Lives Matter movement, when you look at what college student athletes have been able to do already through this pandemic in terms of ensuring that they don't have to sign waivers and be forced to have to play during the midst of COVID. When you see some of those type of movements taking place, shoot, let's just talk about Alabama marching to the school where George Wallace on the steps talked about, that there would never be a black student at Alabama. And they were led by their coach in Nick Saban in that march, but it was the student athletes who put that together. They wanted Saban to lead it, but the student athletes are recognizing more and more their power, that they do have a say in what's going on, that they do have a say in bringing about change at the collegiate level. And that's going to be something that is going to be, I think, a positive going forward, but everybody's going to be really having to watch and see what plays out and how conferences and how schools decide to handle that going forward.
We're talking with Troy Coverdale, the sportscaster, for many, many years, the news director and sports director for KFKA AM radio in northern Colorado. Right now, he's looking for other opportunities. Have you started a podcast yet? Away from that?
No, I haven't started a podcast yet, but I that's probably going to be in the offing here not too long in the future. I'm catching up on a few other things right now that had fallen off the schedule, if you will, because of what travel has been and what everything else has been in terms of my work slate.
Oh, you should be doing commercials. You should be doing voice work. You should be doing, and then, of course, sportscasting. Because I've said that you just have this really terrific voice and presence.
Go ask him, say goal.
Okay, if you want to do soccer, can you just say goal very, very long? Say, let me hear
you.
Yeah, bigger and longer.
Yeah, I'm trying.
I could do that. Go again. Uh-oh, he froze. God damn it.
You do it, Rabbi.
Go! Damn it. There you go. Well done. Now, I'm going to leave you up, Troy, because you're frozen momentarily, but I'm hoping it must be UNC server. Let's see. Come on back. There you go. Welcome back to you.
The internet is a wonderful thing, isn't it?
So let me ask you, though. I always wonder, and one thing I will miss from listening to, because I'm not going to listen to the damn games if you're not there. No point. But who's the guy on KFKA who announces you? Who is that guy with that insane voice? Like, oh, Troy Coverdale. Who is that?
Gentleman goes by the nom de plume David Lee, and he has been doing voiceover work for probably longer than actually that I've been in the business. I actually first heard him doing materials for a classic rock station. It took a long time for me to adjust to the fact that we had him as the station voice here for news talk.
It's the weirdest, most strange, deep, echoey, fucked up voice I've ever heard in my. Now, but let me. Is he like a little guy? Does he look like I would say
no,
thing, but you have no idea who the hell that is. But
no, in actuality, I believe he's about 6'2", and he's a Packers fan.
Yeah. Oh, he's a man mountain case, sounds like it. So, with all due respect to your voice, it's one of the greatest voices I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Oh, KFKA, damn it. It's like, what a voice. But you have a very fine voice, too. And let me ask, as you can see, I am a rabbi, as you can tell by my language and my hat and my pubes and my ears. So let me ask you, you seem to be, in fact, there's one comment, I don't know if you've seen it, in the story about you this past week in the Greeley Tribune, about you were leaving KFKA. And there's one person who wrote in, and it says someone obviously was from church, mentioning a pastor. So how goy are you? How religious are you? Catholic? What are you? What's your thing?
Yeah, my wife and I both are Catholic. She went to, in fact, a all-Catholic grade school, middle school. My mother went to an all-Catholic school as well. So we both were raised in the Catholic faith. We've maybe strayed a little here over the last few years for varying reasons. When this is the part of it that gets tough when you're doing what I do, and that is dealing with the travel. For basketball season, you fly commercial. So you're not flying home from a Saturday night game until Sunday morning. And so getting back in for Mass is
Right. Yeah, I get it. You can't go to church on a Sunday morning if you're on a plane. Although if you're the Orthodox Jews, they just get on the Long Island Railroad and stand there in the aisle praying. You might as well.
You
But
can tell them my mom watches Mass on TV.
yeah. And then David's wife Joyce is saying, hey, you know what? You can watch Mass on TV. You can probably go on the plane and watch it on that little screen there, and then have your moment with Joel Osteen or whoever, or Joel Osteenowitz if you're meaning looking for a
Right.
Jewish person. Yeah. So, but faith is meaningful to you in some way. You believe on some
Yes.
strong core level. Why?
absolutely.
Why?
And
How do you believe? What do you believe in? How do you feel it?
well, the honest truth is that I prefer it to be a conversation, and not so much as what we in terms of Catholics see as the Mass and how it is structured, but I prefer to have that conversation, and that is I talk with God just the way that I would talk with you, and approach it that way, because in the end, you want God to be your friend.
If only. See, we Jews, we have an angry, vengeful
Right.
God. When I talk to God, he's like, "You son of a bitch, my finger hurts. Why? What's the matter with you? Can't you fix my finger? You're God. Fix it." It's not a good conversation, but we do converse all the time.
There are times right now where that's not exactly far off from what's going on in my life either.
Fair. Is everybody? I should have asked. Everybody healthy? You, your wife, do you have kids? I don't know. What's your deal?
We do not have children, but the nice thing about this past weekend, it was Labor Day. We've got back to Kansas to see families, and now all of our families are doing fine and have been able to maintain through the course of the virus without any issues. My folks have done a solid job of self-isolating. My wife's family, my wife's mother is in a community where there have been very few cases, and so that has been dramatically helpful as well. But the grandkids have done a nice job of ensuring that if they're back, that they have been taking care of themselves so that they're not bringing it back to grandma's place.
Got it. By the way, you're a little bit out of sync. I don't. It's so funny. You are the professional broadcaster, and we bring you on the air, and it's like half the time you're freezing, and the mouth isn't going. But
He's
your
on
voice.
Radio, David. He's on radio.
Yeah, that's true. You're radio. You're not video.
Right.
This is. How did you meet your lovely wife? By the way,
I mentioned that group of stations that I worked for in Northeast Kansas, which, is relatively home. I was based at a place that was 45 minutes from where I grew up, covered my own high school, in fact, as part of that. And she lives in one of the communities where the company had a station, and she was working for them for a summer while back from school, and one thing led to another. And we are now 22 years married.
Make muzzle or make click. You should be 20. It should be 42 more. You should be healthy with that. I do want to ask one or two more questions of our guest.
Sure.
Coverdale, the sportscaster. I'm always curious about this because when you get on the air to call, let's say, a football game, right? And it's not just, well, this is the play that happened. You have to have in your head who the players on your team are, who the players on the other team are, what their respective records are, and how they've done, and who's struggling. Well, I mean, how much preparation do you have to do before a game to call a game, and how much is coming at you from people who are, sitting at a computer giving you statistics and things?
The course of the game, the live stats are on a monitor right in front of you. So you're able to keep track of what's going on your computer throughout the course of that in terms of the specific action. But spotting charts are your friend when you're in this business, especially in doing football, because of the number of personnel changes that go on during the course of that. preparation for that, my spotting charts usually start to take shape for a Saturday game on Tuesday. And as soon as I can get to putting the lineups together on those charts for football, I dig in and then continue to build them over the course of the next couple of days, adding notes as I go, adding notes as
What
things
kind of
come up.
notes? What are you putting for yourself to know?
Well, are there trends? Are there things where this student athlete did such and such the week before? With some of the things that are going on, as we talked about in terms of activism, there might be a story or two that would be thrown in and into the notes for a specific player. For example, in UNC's case, one of their football players, linebacker this year, when they do get to play next spring, has been named the Big Sky Conference's Student Athlete Advisory Council Chair. So he's basically the guy who is helping advise the conference heads and the conference leadership as to what has their student athletes' attention in terms of things relating to the conference. So, that's a point that you would bring up in discussion.
And you would make a note of that on Tuesday or Wednesday during the week, and you have it in your head, but you also have literally it in front of you while calling the game, so you could glance at that and glance at and look at the. So when a play is happening, like some sort of quarterback throws the ball, linebacker, whatever stuff happens, are you watching that and calling it, or are you just calling it sort of automatically off the screen telling you what's happening, so you don't have to sort of see who's under the referee with the ball?
Oh, no, I'm calling it directly from my line of sight. And, and that's a big point to bring up, because it's the big adjustment that most of us in this business are faced with right now, at least at college levels and the pros, and that is calling off of a monitor. And in many cases, calling off of a monitor in a community where you're not at the game. A lot of that is taking place. In fact, I know Syracuse, North Carolina, kicking off this morning, Matt Park, who's stellar at Syracuse, he and his crew are actually calling the game off of essentially the TV broadcast as they're in Syracuse, not at Chapel Hill today for the game. And it's an adjustment everybody is stuck making because of the coronavirus restrictions that are in place. And a lot of the companies have looked at it and said, listen, if we can keep you.
Oh, shit. Stay there. You're frozen again, so hold on. You're frozen. You're very cute, but you're still frozen. You're still standing. By the way, this is Troy Coverdale that you're looking at but not hearing. Well, Rabbi Sol Solomon, listened to him talk about what it is for for sportscasters and announcers to have to call games from watching a TV just like we are at home, rather than looking from the field perspective. I think we have you back.
Yes.
No, good. So please finish your thought, though.
Well, and I mean, it's a challenge that we've seen a little bit of that trend taking place in terms of some of the bigger broadcasters. Even ESPN had started to move some of their basketball teams calling action from monitor at their headquarters rather than going out to a location, and that was even happening in some of the Power 5 conferences as a way to keep some costs low. And so it's been a little trend. It's being hastened a bit now because of coronavirus, but it's going to be, again, something to monitor over the next few years, is just how we cover games and how fans watch games, how does that change because of what coronavirus has prompted changes to be?
I swear to God, we're almost at the point where it'll just be Zoom football. Like you see the quarterback in one square on the screen, the ball leaves his hand, then he suddenly arrives in another panel on your screen, then the referee in the lower left going up, blowing the whistle, he hands the whistle off to someone with a Gatorade, the Gatorade goes from one to up, it's nuts.
But along those lines, you're going to have people that can handle those cameras and be able to get those shots that are necessary when you're watching it on TV, no doubt.
Very true. So last question for the very talented, obviously very delightful Troy Coverdale is, what do you, if you had a dream gig, now that you're out there looking for gigs, what would your dream gig be? Please say female naked volleyball, but other than that.
I better not say that one, but I would love to be able to go back to my alma mater and be the voice at Kansas State, because that's how I caught the bug. Listening to my Wildcats over the years, it's a big part of how I caught the bug. Or I would also love to be one of the voices of the Kansas City Royals for the same reason. But it
baseball,
wouldn't. I sure.
Yeah. And what about the Chiefs? Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't turn down an NFL gig, that's for sure, especially if it was one of the national gigs. But, where I grew up, Kansas City had the Chiefs. They were awful. They had the Royals, who were great when I was growing up. It was this way. But we didn't have an NBA team. And college basketball wound up being where the focus was during basketball season. And that's a big part of how we as fans in Kansas anyway, have taken in the game over the years. It's why Kansas basketball is so revered there. It's why Kansas State is so respected there. It's what we had rather than there being a pro team in Kansas City.
Wow. Well, I am hoping then that Kansas has you and you have Kansas again, and you get to call the games of your dreams, Troy Coverdale. It just remains for me, first of all, to thank you ever so much for being with us in the neighborhood. This is, wait, I'm going to get the crowd cheering again. Hold on. This is a crowd going absolutely crazy wild for our guest in the neighborhood, Troy Coverdale. By the way, if people, let's say, listening to you, because nobody wants to listen to this voice, but if people want to hear your voice and they're in media, how can they contact, how can they get in touch with you to say, hey, there may be a job for you?
Easiest way is going to be through my website. It's my name, TroyCoverdale.com.
How pissed off do you get at people who mispronounce your last name, Coverdale?
I don't. I grew up with it. People who should have known better because they've known my family for 40, 50 years still get it wrong. So
I'll still say cover. So, but what is the derivation? It's like an Englishy thing.
It is. If you go back and do research of the Coverdale Bible, we trace our lineage back to Miles Coverdale, giving it the English.
Yeah, Miles Cover. So when the hell did it turn into over?
That we haven't been able to determine. That we're still working on.
Maybe you're mispronouncing it. Maybe you're the wrong one. Maybe it's Coverdale.
Everything gets Americanized.
Well, yeah, or it could be Smith. It's just a lot of letters, but ultimately it's just Smith. But we've been talking with Troy Smith here on Dave's Gone By. Happy years to you. Happy holiday. Well, it's not your holidays, but happy holidays anyway. Good sports, good faith, and good luck to you in
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Appreciate it.
Oh, listen to that crowd go. There they are. Shalom to you. Bye-bye now. Troy Coverdale scores a goal, ladies and gentlemen. 15 points here in the neighborhood with me, Rabbi Sol Solomon.